Welcome, dear traveller. Settle yourself somewhere soft where the world cannot reach you, and let your shoulders fall a little further with every breath you take. Tonight there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to do except listen. Allow your eyelids to grow heavier, your jaw to soften, and your hands to rest open and easy upon whatever blanket or pillow holds you now. Imagine, if you will, that the night around you is beginning to thin, like a sea mist rising slowly from a quiet harbour. The walls of your room dissolve into a darkness deeper and warmer than sleep itself, and in their place a city begins to form, ancient and luminous, drawn in soft strokes of memory. The air grows warmer, scented faintly with cedar smoke, sea salt, and the dry sweetness of old papyrus. Somewhere far away a single oil lantern is being lit, and its slow golden glow reaches across 2,000 quiet years to meet you. You are no longer in your own time. You are walking slowly along a moonlit avenue in Alexandria, the great jewel of the Mediterranean, on a forgotten evening when the world still held more wonder than worry. Ahead of you, half hidden by tall columns and the silver shimmer of starlight, rises a building so vast and so famed that even its silhouette feels like a whispered secret. The Great Library is waiting, and so gently, without fear, without urgency, we step inside together. Before we cross the threshold of this great house of knowledge, allow yourself a moment to simply stand here, on these worn marble steps, and feel the slow Egyptian wind move through your hair. The wind has come a very long way to find you. It has crossed the silent dunes of the Sahara, glided over the gentle waves of the harbour where Pharos Lighthouse glows like a captive star, and now it brushes past your cheek with a touch as soft as a remembered dream. If you find that this gentle wind, this story, this slow unfolding of the past brings you any small measure of peace tonight, you are warmly invited to stay a while longer with us. By quietly tapping the small subscribe symbol below and gently ringing the bell beside it, you will allow many more such evenings to find their way to your door, just as this one has. There is no rush, no urgency at all. Simply a small kind gesture like leaving a candle in your window for a wandering traveller. And should the spirit move you, a single thumb raised in approval or a softly written word left in the comments below helps these old stories drift toward other tired and curious souls across the world. Now, with that quiet kindness behind us, let us turn our attention back to the towering bronze doors before you, breathing low and slow, patient as the night, ready to swing open and welcome us inside. The doors before you are not the kind one finds in the hurried buildings of later centuries, those hollow rectangles fitted with thin iron and impatient ambition. These are doors carved by quiet hands in an age when patience was still considered a kind of prayer. Each door stands more than 3 times the height of a tall man, fashioned from cedarwood imported across the long blue silk of the sea from the slow forests of Lebanon, and clad in beaten panels of warm bronze that have aged into the soft greenish gold of an old olive leaf in autumn. Run your fingertips gently across one of those bronze panels, feel how the metal has been hammered over countless slow afternoons into low reliefs depicting the gathered wisdom of the ancient world. Here, beneath your touch, a tiny scribe leans over a tiny desk, his stylus suspended forever above an unfinished line. There, the figure of a Phoenician sailor cups his hand around the small flame of a navigational lamp, as if shielding knowledge itself from the wind. The metal is cool against the pads of your fingers, a coolness gathered from many evenings of Mediterranean breeze, and yet beneath that coolness the bronze remembers the warmth of countless travellers who have rested their hands here before you. A custodian, a soft-spoken man in a long linen tunic, the colour of cream poured into shallow water, steps forward without hurry. He does not speak. He simply inclines his head, the gesture of a librarian who has learned that words are precious things, never to be spent carelessly outside the pages where they belong. With a single unhurried push, he sets the great doors in motion, and the bronze hinges, oiled with cedar oil and beeswax, give a low, rounded sigh, almost like the breath of something old and benevolent stirring from a long sleep. The sound is not a creak. It is closer to a chord, 2 notes blended together. the deep humming of metal and the soft brush of wood against polished stone, and you find that your own breathing has slowed to match it. Now you step inside. The air that meets you is unlike any air you have ever breathed. It is older, somehow denser with memory, a layered tapestry of scents woven so finely that to describe each thread feels almost ungentle. There is the scent of papyrus, of course, that dry, faintly sweet aroma like wheat stalks left to cure in a sunlit barn. But it is layered with the subtler perfume of cedar oil rubbed into wooden shelves, and beneath that, the green herbal whisper of bay leaves placed between scrolls to discourage the appetites of small bookish moths. Threaded through all of these is the faintest hint of frankincense, drifting in slow ribbons from a brass bowl set upon a low table, where a single coal glows the soft red of a sleeping ember beneath a powder of resin. The smoke does not rise. It hovers, as if uncertain whether to climb toward the ceiling or simply rest among the readers. And you find that you do not mind it resting there, gentle as a thought that has not yet decided to become a word. The first hall is a vestibule of welcome, not yet the great reading rooms, not yet the inner sanctums where the rarer scrolls are kept, but a space designed simply to soften the traveller's heart before the deeper journey begins. Its floor is paved with squares of polished limestone, the soft pink of the inside of a seashell, and between them run thin veins of darker marble, like the unhurried tributaries of a calm river drawn from above. Above your head, the ceiling rises into a low dome, painted across many slow seasons by an Athenian artist whose name has long since drifted from the records, and yet whose work still glows in the lamplight as freshly as it did on the day of its completion. The dome is the deep lapis blue of the sky just after the last bird has gone home for the evening, and across it have been scattered tiny stars rendered in real gold leaf, each one no larger than a fingernail. Each one carefully placed to match the constellations as they were observed above Alexandria on a particular night in early autumn, many decades before tonight. The artist, it is said, climbed his scaffold each evening to check the actual sky against his own progress, painting only what he could verify with his own eyes. To gaze up into that dome now is to see a piece of one specific evening preserved forever, fixed against the slow wheeling of the heavens, suspended in gold for any who happen to look upward. The lamps in this vestibule are themselves objects of quiet artistry. They hang from slender bronze chains, each chain ending in a small oil bowl shaped like a lotus flower in early bloom, the petals folding gently around a single floating wick. The oil within them is pressed from olives grown in the groves outside the city. Oil so pure that the flame burns almost without smoke, a steady amber drop of light that does not flicker so much as breathe. There must be 100 such lamps in this room alone, and yet none of them is set so high or so bright as to wound the eye. The light gathers in pools upon the polished floor, melts softly across the lower walls, and fades into a sleepy blue dimness above, so that the whole hall feels like the inside of a shell held up to a hearth, warm at its lowest curve and cool at its highest arch. Along the walls, set into shallow niches lined with cedar, stand quiet sculptures of the library's old benefactors and patron scholars, carved in pale Egyptian alabaster that seems, in this lamplight, to glow softly from within. Their faces are not stern. The artists who carved them understood that a face carved in stone has many centuries to wear its expression, and so they chose very wisely the expressions of people lost in pleasant thought. One scholar tilts his head as if listening to a half-remembered melody. Another presses his fingertip to his lips, mid-idea, his brows drawn together in the gentle puzzlement of someone trying to recall the name of a beloved childhood friend. A third simply smiles, a small private smile, as though he has just understood something kind about the world. You stand among them for a moment, breathing slowly, allowing the long journey of the day, and indeed of all your recent days, to fall away from your shoulders like a heavy travelling cloak set down at last. You become aware only now of the floor's faint warmth against the soles of your feet, for hidden beneath the limestone slabs runs a slow current of warm air, drawn from a hearth 2 rooms away through clay pipes laid by careful hands during the building's first construction. Even the floor here, it seems, has been designed to welcome you kindly, and so you move forward, soft of step, soft of breath, into the heart of the library, where a tall archway of polished cedarwood frames the corridor that leads at last toward the great reading rooms beyond. The corridor that lies beyond the vestibule is narrower than one might expect of so grand an institution, and that narrowness is, you come to understand, a deliberate kindness. The architects who shaped this place had a particular fondness for what the old Egyptian builders called the breath of the threshold, that small hushed pause between one room and the next, where a soul has the chance to gather itself before stepping into something larger. And so the corridor draws gently inward, its cedar-panelled walls leaning ever so slightly closer together as you progress, until the lamp-lit gold of the vestibule fades behind you and a softer, deeper amber begins to bloom from the chamber ahead. The wood of the walls is old now, even by the standards of this evening. It was hewn from cedars that had already been ancient when the first stones of the library were laid, trees so vast that 3 grown men joining hands could not have circled a single trunk. The grain in these panels runs in long, slow waves, the soft striations of a forest's patient breathing made visible to the eye. Pass your palm lightly along one panel as you walk, and feel the subtle topography beneath your fingers, the gentle ridges where the wood swelled in summers long forgotten, the smoother valleys where it rested through cool winters by some mountain stream. The cedar still releases its faint resinous perfume even after all these decades, a scent so calming that the physicians of Alexandria, who often wandered these very corridors between consultations, have been known to recommend a slow stroll here as a remedy for restless thinking and uneasy sleep. Set into the wall at intervals of perhaps every 20 paces are small alcoves, each no deeper than the length of a forearm, and within each alcove rests a single object placed there to soothe and orient the traveller. The first alcove holds a shallow basin of warm water perfumed with crushed myrtle leaves where any reader who wishes may rinse the dust of the streets from their fingertips before handling the precious scrolls within. The second alcove holds a small bronze stand bearing a roll of soft undid linen neatly folded for the gentle drying of those same fingertips. The third alcove holds nothing at all, only a single sprig of dried lavender resting upon a cushion of pale silk, a quiet reminder perhaps that emptiness too has a place in any well-considered library. You pass each alcove slowly, and in passing your hands seem to remember themselves, becoming softer, less burdened, more ready for the delicate work of touching old paper. The corridor turns once gently to the left following the slow curve of the building's great inner ring, and as it turns the ceiling lifts. You can feel the lift before you see it, a sudden cool freshness of air upon your scalp, a deepening of the lamplight overhead, and when you raise your eyes you find that the corridor has opened into the threshold of the first great reading room. Stop here for a moment. Simply stand in this archway. Do not rush forward. The room before you is too large, too full of slow wonders. Be entered all at once. The reading room is shaped in the form of a long oval, perhaps 40 paces in its longer span and 25 in its shorter, and its ceiling rises 3 full stories above the floor, gathering at its summit into a flattened dome of pale plaster. Set into that dome are 7 oculi, 7 round skylights of thinly polished alabaster, each one pierced through the ceiling like a small captured moon. By day these oculi let in the gentle white gold of Mediterranean sunlight, filtered to a soft milky glow that never grows harsh enough to fade the inks below. By night, like tonight, the oculi reverse their purpose. They release the warm exhalation of the room into the cooler sky above, and they let in return, the silver hush of starlight, just enough that a careful eye can still trace the 7 small constellations that the architect chose to align them with on the night of the building's completion. The walls of the reading room are lined with shelves, and the shelves are not the simple plank arrangements of a country merchant's storeroom, but tall, deeply carved cabinets of dark olive wood, fitted with rounded compartments precisely sized to cradle the ends of papyrus scrolls. Each scroll rests upon its side in its own honeycombed cell, the protruding end closed with a small disc of polished cedarwood, and from the centre of each disc hangs a tiny bronze tag stamped with the scroll's catalogue number, its title, and the small private sigil of the scribe who first copied it into the library's collection. The discs hang at slight individual angles, never perfectly aligned, and so the wall seen from a few paces back takes on the soft texture of a cliff face dotted with countless small wooden swallows nesting in its hollows. There must be 40,000 scrolls in this room alone, and this is only one of many such rooms in the Great Library. The thought is too vast to hold in the mind all at once, and so you do not try. You simply allow your eye to travel along the curve of one shelf, then another, watching the slow play of lamplight upon the rounded ends of the scrolls, the way each small disc catches its own particular shade of amber, like a long shoreline of polished pebbles glimpsed at sunset. In the centre of the room stand the reading tables, 12 of them in total, arranged in 2 parallel rows of 6. Each table is a single slab of dark green Egyptian breccia, a stone that takes a polish so deep that, looking down upon it, one might almost believe one is gazing into the still surface of a forest pool at dusk. The legs of each table are carved into the gentle shapes of ibis birds standing in shallow water, their slender necks bowed forward, as if reading the surface of the stone itself. At each table sits a single low chair of cedar padded with a thin cushion of pale wool, and upon each table rests one small reading lamp, one slim wooden stylus, and one folded square of soft linen for cleaning the fingertips between scrolls. Few of the tables are occupied even at this evening hour. A scholar in a deep blue robe sits hunched over a scroll of Alexandrian astronomy, his lips moving silently as he reads, a small and contented half-smile upon his face. Young scribe with ink-stained fingers leans toward her work, copying a passage of Sapphic verse onto a fresh sheet, her brush moving with the slow, certain confidence of someone who has practiced this single motion 10,000 times before. An elderly historian sits with his eyes closed, a scroll resting open before him, dreaming perhaps of the events the scroll describes, allowing the words to settle into him slowly, the way warm honey settles into bread. No one looks up as you stand in the archway. No one even seems to notice you. And this, too, to Protestantis a kindness, for the library has long believed that a true reader should be allowed to enter and to leave a room as freely and as quietly as a thought. You step away from the archway at last, soft of foot, mindful of the quiet that hangs over the reading room like a fine layer of mist upon a meadow at dawn. The floor beneath you here is no longer limestone but a darker stone altogether, a polished basalt the colour of a moonless sea, set in tiles so cunningly fitted that the joins between them are almost invisible to the eye. The basalt has been worn over the slow generations into the gentlest of hollows along the walking paths, faint depressions where the feet of countless scholars have passed and passed again, each one leaving 1,000th part of an impression behind. To walk along these paths is to walk in the soft footprints of every reader who has ever come before you, and there is something deeply consoling in that thought, the knowledge that you are simply the latest in a long, patient procession of curious souls. The lamps in this inner chamber are arranged differently from those in the vestibule. Here they do not hang from the ceiling, but rest instead upon tall, slender stands of polished bronze, each stand rising to about the height of a tall man's shoulder, each one terminating in a small triple-armed cluster of oil bowls fashioned in the shape of 3 open lotus blossoms gathered upon a single stem. The lamps at this height cast their light not upward toward the ceiling, where it would be wasted upon the alabaster oculi, but outward and slightly downward, washing the lower half of the room in a warm honeyed gold while leaving the upper reaches in a dimmer, more dreamlike haze. The architects believed, and rightly so, that a reading room should always feel a little taller than the eye can quite measure, that a sense of unseen vastness above one's head is a great encouragement to deep and patient thought. Between the reading tables and the curved walls of shelves, you notice a series of small wheeled carts moving slowly through the room, each one pushed by a young apprentice in the pale grey tunic that marks them as still in their first 3 years of service. These carts are wonders in their own quiet way, rectangular trays of cedar wood mounted upon 4 small wooden wheels rimmed with strips of soft leather, so that they make no clatter at all upon the basalt floor, only a faint rolling whisper. almost indistinguishable from the sound of a slow breath drawn through nearly closed lips. Upon each cart rests a careful arrangement of scrolls, perhaps 15 or 20 at a time, organized not alphabetically but by what the senior librarians call mood, that is, scrolls likely to be wanted together by a reader pursuing a particular line of thought. Cart of natural philosophy might carry a scroll of Empedoclean fragments, beside a treatise on the migration of cranes, beside a smaller scroll of medical observations on the rhythms of human breath, all because the cataloguers have noticed over the years that minds drawn to one of these subjects often wander sooner or later toward the others. The apprentices push their carts in silence, each one moving with the slow, careful grace of an acolyte at a temple. They have been trained, you sense, not only in the cataloguing and shelving of scrolls, but in something deeper, a kind of bodily quietness, a way of moving through space that does not disturb the air. You watch one such apprentice, a young woman with her dark hair bound up beneath a soft linen scarf, as she lifts a scroll from her cart with both hands, holds it for a moment as though weighing the words inside it, and then slides it gently into its waiting cell on the shelf. The disc at the scroll's end clicks faintly into place, a small sound like a single drop falling into a still pool, and then the silence of the room closes softly over the moment, healing itself. Toward the far end of the reading room, almost hidden by a tall standing screen of carved cedar lattice work, you become aware of a soft current of cooler air. It does not chill, only freshens, the way a glass of well water freshens a warm afternoon. Drawn by curiosity rather than urgency, you move toward the screen, your feet sinking pleasantly into the gentle hollows of the basalt path, and as you draw closer, you see that the screen does not stand against a wall as you first supposed, but instead frames the head of a wide, slow staircase descending into the lower levels of the library. The staircase is broad, broader than seems strictly necessary, with each step worn smooth and gently sloping, the rise between them shallow enough that even the eldest of scholars might descend without effort. The steps are made of the same pale pink limestone as the vestibule above, and at the edge of each step is set a single thin strip of brass, polished to a soft shine, marking the boundary between one stair and the next, so that no foot might miscount itself in the dimmer light below. Slender bronze handrail runs along the wall, supported by small lotus-headed brackets, and the handrail is wrapped in a long continuous spiral of soft brown leather, padded beneath with wool, so that the hand that rests upon it feels nothing but a comfortable warmth. You linger at the head of this staircase, breathing the cool air that rises from below. It carries new scents now, scents subtler and older than those of the reading rooms above. There is the dry mineral whisper of stone that has not seen sunlight in many years, and beneath that a faint sweetness like the honey and resin smell of beeswax tablets stacked in their hundreds, and beneath that still a deeper note, almost imperceptible, the patient earthiness of clay tablets pressed and dried in some far older century. The lower archives, you understand, hold not only papyrus scrolls but the elder forms of writing as well, the cuneiform tablets of Babylon, the long thin wooden strips of the easternmost trade routes, the leather sheets of certain desert peoples, all gathered here under one roof so that no record, no matter how ancient or how foreign, need ever be lost to the slow forgetfulness of time. You do not yet descend. You simply rest your hand upon the leather-wrapped rail and gaze down into the warm dimness below, where you can just make out the soft glow of further oil lamps lining a curved wall, their reflections trembling faintly upon what appears to be a still pool of water set into the centre of the lower hall. For the architects, in their patient wisdom, included a great cistern down there, both to humidify the air for the protection of the older documents, and to provide a still reflective surface that doubles the light of the lamps without doubling the heat. The lower archives, you sense, are gentler still than the rooms above, a deeper well of quiet within the already quiet building. Small sign of pale ivory has been set into a polished niche beside the stairhead, inscribed in 3 languages, Greek upon the upper third, Egyptian Demotic in the middle, and Aramaic upon the lower third. The words are a simple courtesy. Tread softly, the older the writing, the lighter the step. You smile at this very faintly, and you breathe, and you stay where you are, allowing the cool air from below to rise around your ankles like a gentle tide, preparing eventually to carry you down. You begin your descent at last, moving slowly, one careful step at a time, allowing the gentle slope of each worn stair to draw you downward at the pace of a tide receding from a quiet beach. The leather-wrapped handrail beneath your palm is warm in places and cool in others, warm where the hands of recent visitors have rested, cool where it has lain untouched for an hour or more, and this small variation reads almost like a kind of language, record of who has passed this way before you, written in the gentle thermal handwriting of human touch. The brass strips at the edges of each step gleam softly in the lamplight, marking your progress in small bright lines, like the rungs of a ladder lowered patiently into a quiet well. The deeper you descend, the more the air begins to change around you. The dry, papery sweetness of the upper rooms gives way to something cooler and more mineral, a scent like the inside of a sea cave at low tide, mingled with the older perfumes of beeswax and leather, and something deeper still, faint earthen note like the smell of a clay jar that has held cool water for a very long time. The temperature drops by perhaps 3 or 4 degrees, just enough that you become aware of the small warm pocket of air that walks down with you, the soft cocoon of your own breathing, surrounded now by the cooler embrace of the archive below. When at last you reach the bottom of the staircase, you find yourself standing upon a broad circular landing of pale travertine, its surface worn into the same gentle hollows as the floors above, polished by generations of slow and reverent feet. The landing opens outward into a great curved gallery, perhaps 80 paces in its full circumference, that runs in an unbroken ring around the central feature of the lower archive. And the central feature, the heart and quiet engine of this lower world, is the cistern. Take a moment now, simply to look at it. The cistern is circular, perhaps 15 paces across, set down into the floor at a depth that brings its surface to about the level of a tall man's knees. Its rim is carved from a single great band of dark green Egyptian breccia, the same stone as the reading tables far above, and that rim is polished to a depth of reflection so profound that the lamplight seems to sink into it before bouncing slowly back. The water within the cistern is perfectly still, drawn through a series of slow underground channels from a deep spring beneath the city, filtered through layers of fine sand and crushed charcoal, so that it lies clear as the air itself, and across its surface there moves not a single ripple, not even the faintest tremble. To gaze down into the cistern is to gaze into a perfect twin of the chamber above, every lamp doubled, every curve of the ceiling reproduced in patient detail, so that the lower archive seems to extend not only outward in its great gallery, but downward as well, into a mirrored half-world of equal beauty. The architects, who clearly delighted in such gentle illusions, have placed the lamps of this lower hall in a deliberate ring around the cistern's rim, raised upon slender stands of dark bronze, each stand worked into the shape of a tall papyrus, reed with a single oil bowl cradled at its tip like a flower opening to the sun. There are 40 such lamps in all, evenly spaced, and the light they cast upon the still water doubles itself into a wider, softer glow that suffuses the entire gallery, so that no corner of the lower archive ever falls into true shadow. The light here is not golden, as in the upper rooms, but a warmer amber tinted very slightly with green, a colour that the local poets have over the years described as the colour of an old olive grove just before the rain. Around the curved outer wall of the gallery stand the older shelves, the deeper memory of the library. These are not the elegant honeycombed cabinets of the upper reading rooms, designed for the slim cylinders of papyrus, but stout and patient cases of dark cypress wood, fitted with broad open shelves layered in soft linen, upon which rest the more ancient forms of writing. Here are the clay tablets of old Mesopotamia, pressed with the wedge-shaped strokes of cuneiform, each one no larger than the palm of a hand, each one resting in its own little cradle of folded cloth so that it shall never knock against its neighbour. Here are the long wooden strips, narrow as a finger and as long as a forearm, that were once bound together with silken cord into the books of the eastern lands beyond the great mountains. Here are folded sheets of fine leather, supple even now, inscribed with the alphabets of desert peoples whose languages are no longer spoken aloud, but only quietly read by the very few scholars trained in their gentle music. And here are tablets of beeswax laid into shallow wooden frames, the wax still faintly fragrant, still bearing the small careful indentations of styluses that drew their letters before being smoothed away again, ready for new thought. Single guardian moves slowly along the gallery, an older woman in a deep indigo robe, her hair gone the soft silver of a cloud at moonrise, her hands folded behind her in the patient posture of someone who has spent 40 years walking these same slow circles. She does not look at you. She does not need to. The library has long understood that a guardian who watches too closely makes the air uneasy, while a guardian who simply moves, present and unhurried, makes the air feel safe in the way a sleeping cat makes a house feel safe. Her sandals are soft leather, soled with felt, and they make no sound at all upon the travertine floor. She passes within 3 paces of you, and you smell, very faintly, the herbal perfume of dried rosemary tucked into the folds of her robe, an old custom said to keep the small white moths of the archive from finding their way into the older parchments. Set into the inner curve of the gallery, just opposite the great cistern, are 3 small reading alcoves, each one a softly lamplit half-circle of cushioned cedar benches, where a scholar may sit and study the more delicate documents without the need to carry them through the larger spaces above. One of the alcoves is occupied by a single elderly reader, a man so still and so absorbed in the tablet before him that, at first glance, you mistake him for one of the alabaster sculptures in the vestibule. He does not turn the tablet, for it cannot be turned, only leans toward it gently, his lips moving in the slow shapes of an extinct vocabulary, his eyes bright with the small private joy of remembered understanding. There is something almost holy about his posture, something kindred to prayer, though it is not prayer he is engaged in, but a far older and more intimate act. The act of listening to a voice that has not spoken aloud for 2,000 years, and yet, here in his gentle attention, is allowed to speak again. You stand at the edge of the cistern, breathing the cool green-amber air, and you let your eyes drift downward into the still mirror of the water, where another version of yourself stands looking softly back. You leave the cistern reluctantly, the way one leaves a quiet pool at the close of a summer evening, with the small private wish that the moment might be kept and carried in the pocket of memory. The guardian in the indigo robe has by now drifted to the far side of the gallery, her silvered head bent in soft consideration over a tablet she has lifted from its linen cradle, and you slip past her without disturbance, your footfalls no more than a whisper against the polished travertine. The path she follows in her endless, slow circle passes near a narrow opening in the curved outer wall, an opening so unassuming that you might have missed it altogether, had a faint draught of warmer air not drawn your attention there. It is a small archway no taller than the height of an average door, framed in pale alabaster panels carved with the soft repeating motif of climbing ivy, and beyond it begins a hidden spiral stair. The stair is narrow, made for one person at a time, its steps wrapping around a central column of polished basalt that gleams in the lamplight like a still column of black water. Single oil lamp set within a recessed niche at the foot of the stair lights the first few turns, while higher up, further niches glow faintly at intervals, so that the spiral seems to curve upward into a slow ascending chain of warm amber moons. You begin to climb. The steps are gentle, shallow, designed for unhurried legs and contemplative thought, and you feel no strain in the climb, only a soft awakening of warmth in your calves, the pleasant reminder that even slow motion is a kind of nourishment to the body. Up and up you turn, and the air grows steadily warmer, drier, scented now with something new, a faint smoky sweetness like the resin of the terebinth tree, mingled with the vegetal whisper of long-stored ink and the distant fragrance of cedarwood softened by years of patient sunlight. You become aware somewhere above you of a great hush, larger and rounder than the hush of the reading rooms below, the quiet of a vaulted space whose ceiling lies far higher than the eye can quickly measure. The stair brings you, at last, into the threshold of the Hall of Maps. This chamber is unlike any you have seen so far. It is rectangular, long rather than wide, and its ceiling rises into a high barrel vault painted in the deep midnight blue of the starlit sea between Crete and Egypt. The vault is studded with countless small constellations rendered in real silver leaf rather than gold, so that the night sky overhead glows in a cooler, more lunar light than the warmer dome of the vestibule. At the center of the vault, exactly above the hall's longest axis, a single slim line of gold runs from one end to the other, drawn carefully to mark the meridian of Alexandria itself. This line is precise, the work of an astronomer and a painter laboring side by side over many slow nights, and it allows any visitor who stands at the center of the hall and looks directly upward to know at a glance the exact direction in which the sun will rise upon the next morning. The walls of the hall are covered from waist height to the edge of the vault with the largest collection of maps in the known world. Some are painted directly upon the plastered walls, fresco fashion, their colours softened by the lamps to gentle blues and earthen reds, and the pale muted greens of olive groves seen from a great height. Others are drawn upon stretched panels of pale linen mounted in slim cedar frames, hanging in rows so neatly aligned that they create the impression of a long single tapestry of geography. Still others, the rarer and more delicate ones, are kept rolled within tall bronze tubes set into honeycombed cabinets along the lower walls, each tube engraved with the small careful sigil of the cartographer who first drew the map within. The maps themselves are wonders. Here in the centre of the long left wall hangs a great chart of the Mediterranean Sea, drawn so patiently and so finely that one might count upon its rendered shorelines the individual harbours of Carthage, Tyre, Massalia and beyond. The sea itself is washed in a particular shade of blue made from powdered lapis, lazuli imported across the long caravan routes from the eastern mountains, a blue so deep that the lamplight seems to swim within it, and in the open waters between the coasts have been drawn small ships under full sail, each ship no larger than a fingernail, each one detailed with miniature oars and tiny billowing canvas. And beside each ship in a delicate flowing hand a small inscription notes the trade goods most often carried along that particular sea lane in that particular month of the year. To the right of the Mediterranean chart hangs a great map of the Upper Nile, drawn vertically rather than horizontally to honour the river's long journey from south to north, and across this map have been marked the seasonal rises and falls of the floodwaters, the locations of the slow cataracts, and the patient migrations of the white ibis, the heron, and the small shy crocodile of the river marshes. Further along the same wall is a chart of the Red Sea and its tributary harbours, with notations for the prevailing winds in each season, and beyond that, more imaginatively, a long unfolding diagram of the trade routes that wind eastward across deserts and mountains toward the lands of silk and spice, lands whose true geography no Alexandrian cartographer has ever seen with his own eyes, and which are therefore drawn with a kind of poetic vagueness, soft watercolour fading at their farther edges as if to admit gracefully that knowledge has its own polite limits. The opposite long wall is given over to the celestial charts. Here are drawn the constellations as observed from various latitudes within the known world, each one rendered upon a great circular panel of pale parchment stretched across a wooden hoop, with the brighter stars marked by small discs of beaten silver leaf, and the dimmer stars by simpler dots of fine charcoal. The constellations are not only those of the Greek tradition, but those of older traditions as well. The lion of Mesopotamia, the great hippopotamus of older Egyptian astronomy, the wandering boats and gentle reed cutters of the Nile sky. Each chart is accompanied by a small lower panel of notes written in 3 languages, recording the dates of significant celestial events, as they had been observed from Alexandria over the preceding 2 centuries. The slow turnings of the equinox, the gentle predictable returns of certain comets, the long patient breathings of the planets across the fixed night. In the centre of the hall beneath the meridian line stands a great round table of polished sycamore wood, and upon this table rests at the moment a single half-unrolled scroll, weighted at its corners by 4 small cushions of red velvet sewn around stones of pale rose quartz. A cartographer's lamp, smaller and more focused than the others, has been drawn close to its edge. The scroll is a partial map of the western coast of an unknown land, its northern end fading off into uncertainty, and beside it lie two slim brushes, a small open jar of black ink, and a folded handkerchief that has been used, by the look of it, wipe a thoughtful brow during many evenings of patient work. The cartographer, whoever they are, has stepped away for a moment, perhaps to fetch a cup of water, perhaps to rest their eyes upon the silver constellations overhead, and the room has been left for now entirely to you. You leave the Hall of Maps by a different door than the one through which you entered, drawn now by a soft and steady sound that has begun to reach you through the lamplit air, a sound so gentle and so rhythmic that you mistake it, at first, for the distant lapping of water against a harbour wall. It is not water, it is the sound of brushes. Many brushes, dozens of them perhaps, moving across many sheets of fresh papyrus in the patient sweeping cadence of the library's evening scribes at their work. Then the sound carries in it that particular hush which accompanies any large gathering of people who are concentrating deeply upon small and precise things. Whisper of bristles, a faint dry kiss of brush against fibre, a softer answering rustle as a finished sheet is set aside to dry, and then, after a measured pause, the gentle dipping of brushes once more into their waiting wells of ink. It is a music without melody, the slow respiration of careful hands, and you find your own breathing falling into step with it almost before you have noticed. The corridor that leads to the copying hall is shorter than those you have walked before, and its walls are lined not with cedar panelling but with woven hangings of pale undyed linen, soft to the eye, gentle to the air. These hangings have a purpose beyond mere decoration. They absorb sound. The library's elders learned long ago that the murmur of brushwork carries surprisingly far through hard-walled passages, and so along this stretch they have hung the soft cloths in deliberate folds, each one tied lightly to a slim cedar rod above and weighted at its lower hem with a small cylinder of polished river stone, so that the linen drapes in slow vertical waves and drinks in any small sound that wishes to escape. To walk this corridor is to feel for a moment that you have stepped inside a great quiet curtain, and the world has been gently muffled out of respect for the work you are about to witness. The copying hall, when you enter it, opens before you in a long rectangle of warm light. Its ceiling is lower than those of the reading rooms, no more than the height of two tall men, and this lowness is also intentional, a kindness designed to keep the lamp warmth gathered close around the working hands rather than rising uselessly into vault and shadow. The hall is broader than it is deep, with 3 long rows of desks running parallel to the longer walls, and at each desk sits a single scribe, bent slightly forward in the gentle attentive posture of a person doing slow and beloved work. There must be 30 scribes here this evening, perhaps 35, and yet the room feels neither crowded nor sparse, for the desks have been set far enough apart that no scribe disturbs another, tanned close enough that the shared concentration of so many minds settles upon the room like a soft canopy. The desks themselves are objects worth lingering over. Each one is carved from a single plank of pale tamarisk wood set at a slight inclination toward the scribe, so that the writing surface tilts gently upward, easing the angle of the wrist and the fall of the brush. The far edge of each desk is fitted with a low wooden lip, no taller than a fingernail, against which the lower edge of the papyrus sheet may be steadied while it is being inscribed. To the right of each scribe, upon a small attached side tray, sits the implements of the evening's work, and these implements are arranged with the quiet ceremony of a temple offering. There is the ink well fashioned from a hollowed nodule of black soapstone, polished smooth as river glass, fitted with a tiny lid of cedar wood that lifts upon a delicate bronze hinge. There is the small water jar of glazed earthenware, kept beside the ink well so that the ink may be thinned with a single drop of clear water whenever it grows too thick. There is the brush rest, a slim arched piece of bone or carved horn, upon which the brush may be laid horizontally without smearing the desk. And there is the brush itself, or rather brushes, for each scribe keeps 3 of them in a tidy row, one for the body of the text, one for the smaller notes that accompany it, and one finer than the others for the careful tracing of the initial letter at the head of each new section. The brushes are made by hand, here within the library's own workshops, from the long, fine tail hairs of certain Egyptian river rats whose pelts have been considered for many slow centuries the finest source of writing bristles in all the Mediterranean world. The hairs are gathered, washed in warm water, with crushed myrtle leaves, dried in the shade for 3 full days, and then bound with great patience into the hollow ends of slim reed handles cut from the marshes south of the city. Single brush, properly made, will last a careful scribe through the copying of 3 or 4 full scrolls, and there is in the library a small reverent custom of giving a worn-out brush an honourable retirement by burying it beneath the roots of one of the cedar trees in the courtyard outside, so that something of its long faithful service may rejoin the great slow conversation of growing things. The ink itself is mixed each evening in a small adjoining room by an apprentice whose sole responsibility for the first 2 years of her training is to learn the slow alchemy of ink. The library uses several inks, but the most common is the steady black made from the soft soot of olive oil lamps gathered upon a slanted ceramic plate, mixed with a binder of acacia gum and a few drops of warm water. The mixing is done in small batches in shallow basins of unglazed clay, and stirred with a slim wooden paddle in slow, patient circles for not less than a quarter hour, for the ink that has not been stirred long enough will settle into its components again upon the page and produce, after a few months, the small hollow ghosts of words. There is also a softer brown ink, made from gall nuts steeped in vinegar, used for the marginal notes of scholars, and a rare red ink, reserved for the headings of particularly cherished texts, made from powdered ochre suspended in a clear glaze. You move slowly along the central aisle of the copying hall, and as you pass each desk, you steal a quiet glance at the work in progress. One scribe, a young man with the soft beginnings of a beard and a small contented smile, is copying a treatise on the migration of birds, his brush moving in slow, even rows, occasionally pausing while he tilts his head as though listening for the rhythm of the sentences. Another, an older woman with a single grey braid drawn over her shoulder, is at work upon a poem, and you can see, by the slightly slower pace of her brush, that she is reading each word twice before committing it to the new page, once to confirm the form and once to honour the meaning. Third scribe, very young perhaps, in only her first year of service, is copying a children's primer, and her tongue protrudes very slightly between her lips in the universal posture of any human being learning a beloved craft. And you find that this small detail moves you more than you can quite explain. You choose, almost without choosing, to linger at the desk of the older woman with the single grey braid. There is something in the slowness of her hands, in the small private stillness that surrounds her like the calm just before snowfall, that draws you to her side as gently as a tide drawing a small boat homeward. She does not look up at your approach. The scribes of the library have long understood that a visitor who lingers nearby is not an interruption, but simply another quiet form of company, and so she continues her work, and you stand a respectful pace away, watching the slow ceremony of a single word being born. She has been copying a long ode by an old Aeolian poet, transcribing it from a scroll that lies open at her left elbow onto a fresh sheet of pale papyrus that lies ready and patient before her. The fresh sheet is the soft, almost luminous cream of the inner pith of the papyrus reed, lightly polished with a smooth disc of seashell, so that it accepts the ink cleanly without bleeding outward into the fibres. At the corners of the sheet 4 small weights have been placed, 4 little pebbles of polished black river stone, each one no larger than a robin's egg, each one chosen for its particular smoothness and the quiet roundness of its shape. These pebbles are the scribe's old companions gathered. She will tell anyone who asks from a particular bend of a particular stream during a holiday of her childhood, and they have weighed down every sheet she has ever copied in her 38 years of service to the library. She is about to write a single word. The word in the language of the poem means something close to a long, quiet breathing, the slow exhalation of a sleeper at peace, though no single word in any modern tongue captures it precisely. Watch her now. She lifts her finest brush from its bone rest with a movement so small and so deliberate that the air around her hand barely stirs. She holds the brush vertically, the slim reed handle balanced lightly between thumb and the first 2 fingers. the tail of the brush hanging down toward the desk in the quiet readiness of a dancer awaiting the first note of music. With her free hand, she steadies a corner of the fresh sheet, applying just enough pressure to keep the papyrus from shifting, no more. She lowers the brush slowly toward the small black mirror of her ink well. The bristles touch the surface of the ink and drink, in the gentlest of sips, only what they require. She lifts the brush again, and now, before she will allow it to approach the page, she pauses for a long, careful moment over a small ceramic plate set just to the left of the ink well, a plate whose sole purpose is to receive the first hesitant kiss of a freshly dipped brush. She presses the bristles lightly against the plate, watching the way the ink spreads, judging its consistency by its sheen and by the small sound it makes against the clay. And only when she is satisfied, only when she has confirmed that the ink is neither too thick to flow nor too thin to hold its line, does she at last bring the brush toward the waiting sheet. The first stroke of the word begins as the lightest possible touch, a feather fall of bristle against fibre, gathering weight and certainty as the line travels across the page. Her wrist does not move, her elbow does not move, only her shoulder turns, slowly, in a slow controlled arc, and the brush follows, painting a long curve of black ink that thickens and thins with the natural rhythm of her breath, ending at last in the smallest possible upward flick. She lifts the brush, she breathes once. She returns to the inkwell, takes another sip of darkness, presses the bristles again to the small ceramic plate, and adds the second stroke of the word, and then the third. And then, after another patient pause and another small communion with the ink, the fourth and final stroke. The word is complete. It rests upon the page now, glistening faintly while the ink is still wet. The 4 black strokes arranged in a quiet harmony that somehow contains within itself the whole meaning of the long, quiet breathing it describes. She gazes at it for a moment. Then, satisfied, she lays the brush back upon its rest, lifts a small brass disc no larger than a coin from the upper corner of her desk, and gently fans the wet ink for a span of perhaps 8 or 10 slow breaths, until the blackness has dulled from glisten to matte, and the word has settled fully into the page. You step back, soundlessly, and you understand, with a kind of warm, sleepy clarity, that you have just witnessed something rarer than a great speech or a famous battle. You have watched a single word being copied with reverence, and the world is, some quiet way, made larger for it. You move on now toward the far end of the copying hall, where a low archway, framed in plain whitewashed plaster, leads outward into the small adjoining workshops. Through this archway drifts an entirely different range of scents, less perfumed and more elemental. There is the green grassy fragrance of fresh papyrus reeds laid out to dry, the faint vinegary tang of warm water in which sheets are being prepared, and the dry whisper of beaten flax fibres laid in soft heaps for the papyrus makers to work into the binding edges of newly assembled scrolls. The first workshop is the cutting room, a long, low space whose floor is covered in a thick mat of woven rush, soft underfoot, gathering up any stray fragments of fibre that fall from the work tables. Here, 2 patient men in undyed linen aprons stand at long benches of plain pine, slicing the inner pith of fresh papyrus reeds into thin, even strips with knives, so sharp that they make almost no sound at all. The strips are pale, translucent, the colour of new butter, and they are laid in 2 crossed layers, one running lengthwise and one running across, to be pressed and dried into the familiar cream-coloured sheets of the library's papyrus. The second workshop is the pressing room, smaller and quieter still, where the layered strips are pressed beneath broad flat stones for several slow days, the sap of the reeds binding the layers together without need of any glue. Old natural alchemy that the Egyptians discovered long before the library was built, and which has not been improved upon since. The stones rest in patient stacks, rising to about waist height, and the air in this small room smells faintly of cucumber, of warm grass, of the sleepy wholesomeness of green growing things. The third and final workshop is the polishing room, where finished sheets are smoothed by gentle apprentices using small discs of seashell and cowrie, working in slow circular motions until the surface of each sheet takes on the soft sheen of well-loved silk. An apprentice here, a young man no older than 17, is humming under his breath as he polishes, an old fisherman's tune from the harbour, and the rhythm of his polishing matches the rhythm of his humming, so that the very papyrus seems to be lulled toward its destiny as a page of careful writing. The polishing room ends in a softly arched doorway hung with a curtain of pale flax linen, the cloth so finely woven that the lamp glow on either side of it bleeds gently through the fibres, giving it the soft inner luminescence of a moth's wing held against a window. As you draw aside this curtain, parting it slowly with the back of one hand, the way one parts the surface of a still pool, a new world of warmth and fragrance breathes outward to meet you, and you find yourself standing upon the threshold of the library's evening kitchens. The first thing that reaches you is the smell, and it reaches you in slow layers, the way a chord is built from its lower notes upward. Beneath everything lies the deep round fragrance of fresh wheat bread, baking in stone ovens, that particular sweetness which has welcomed travellers home in every century since the first hearth was kindled. Above that note rises the gentler perfume of warm goat's milk, simmering with a small spoonful of wild honey and a single bruised cardamom pod, prepared for the youngest apprentices whose stomachs have not yet learned the heavier evening wines. Above that still drifts the scent of figs being slow roasted upon a bronze griddle, their skins splitting open in soft sighs to release a caramel dark sweetness, and above that, finally, the subtler herbal whisper of dried thyme and crushed coriander seeds being warmed upon a small bed of olive coals to release their oils into the supper that is being readied for the senior scholars. The kitchen itself is a long, low room, broader than it is deep, with a vaulted ceiling of pale plaster, blackened only very slightly by the patient smoke of many years of careful cookery. The floor is laid in worn terracotta tiles whose colour has deepened over time into a soft brick rose, and along the walls run wide workbenches of scrubbed olive wood, their surfaces scored with the gentle shallow grooves of 1,000 quiet evenings of chopping and kneading. Above the benches, suspended from long iron hooks set into the ceiling beams, hang braids of golden onions, woven ropes of garlic the colour of ivory, small dried bouquets of wild marjoram and savoury, and round dark wheels of pressed fig paste wrapped in vine leaves for keeping. The hooks themselves are old, and the iron has been polished smooth in a few particular places by the hands of cooks who, over many years, have rested their fingers in the same accustomed spots while reaching for the same accustomed herbs. At the far end of the kitchen stand the great ovens, 3 of them in a row, built into the thick wall of the library itself. They are domed structures of rough sun-baked clay, glowing now with the soft amber of low embers, each one tended by a quiet baker in a long apron of pale linen. The bread within is the kind of bread that Alexandria has always known, round flat loaves the size of a small platter, scored upon their tops with a single curved line, baked until their edges turn the colour of an autumn leaf and their bottoms ring faintly hollow when tapped with a knuckle. As you watch, one of the bakers draws a long-handled wooden peel from the mouth of his oven, and upon the peel rest 3 perfect golden loaves, steaming softly, releasing into the air a scent so deeply consoling that you feel your shoulders sink another small measure toward rest. Along the central workbench, 2 cooks, a stout woman with flour to her elbows and a thin, patient man with a small oil lamp clipped to his belt for the dimmer hours, are preparing the evening's lighter dishes. There are shallow earthenware bowls of pearled barley simmered in vegetable broth and finished with a drizzle of green olive oil. There are small dishes of soft white cheese rolled in cracked black pepper and crushed mint. There are platters of figs split open and stuffed with whole almonds, drizzled with the thinnest thread of dark honey from the orchards south of the city. There are slim loaves of olive bread studded with the dark wrinkled fruit of last summer's harvest, and small clay cups of a thin white wine cut with rose water and chilled very slightly in a basin of cool spring water set into the stone floor. The library's evenings have always been times of light and gentle eating, for the elders learned long ago that a heavy belly makes for a heavy thought, and that the deeper hours of study are best approached with a body kindly fed but never burdened. Beyond the kitchens, separated by a low archway hung with another linen curtain, lie the dining alcoves. These are not formal halls, but a series of small intimate rooms, each one large enough for perhaps 8 or 10 diners, arranged around a central courtyard open to the night sky. Each alcove is furnished with a single low table of dark cypress wood and a ring of cushioned benches upholstered in undyed wool, and each alcove is named by old custom after a Mediterranean island. There is the alcove of Rhodes, the alcove of Cyprus, the alcove of Crete, the alcove of Lesbos, the alcove of Samos, the alcove of Delos, and a half-dozen others, each one decorated with a small wall painting representing the chief feature of its namesake island, a sun-bleached harbour. Hillside of olive trees, a temple half hidden in a grove of cypress, a fishing boat at quiet anchor. In the alcove of Lesbos, just now, 4 senior scholars sit at supper. They are an unhurried group, 2 men and 2 women, all of them of an age at which the body has learned the wisdom of slow chewing and longer pauses between thoughts, and their conversation drifts among them in low, gentle waves, never overlapping, never interrupting, kind of linguistic music in which each speaker waits with patient pleasure for the silence of the other. They are discussing, you gather as you pass slowly by the curtained doorway, a small disagreement about the migration patterns of cranes. But they are discussing it the way old friends discuss such things, more for the pleasure of the conversation than for the urgency of the conclusion, and a small dish of honeyed figs sits between them, half-eaten, in the soft amber of a single lotus lamp. In the alcove of Rhodes, 3 younger scribes share a simpler meal of barley and bread, and they too are speaking, but more softly, almost shyly, the way young people speak in the company of an institution they still feel slightly in awe of. They are discussing the particular curve of a certain Greek letter as it is written in the old style versus the new style, and one of them is tracing the shape with her finger upon the polished wood of the table, while the other 2 lean forward to watch, their faces lit very softly by the small lamp at the centre of the table, their eyes bright with the particular kindness of shared interest. In the open courtyard between the alcoves, a small fountain plays, no taller than the height of a child, its water drawn from the same deep spring that feeds the cistern far below. The sound of the fountain is the gentlest possible accompaniment to the suppers around it, a soft continuous trickle that fills the small spaces between conversations, the way pale silk fills the small spaces between the threads of a tapestry. And you stand beside the fountain for a moment, listening, breathing, feeling the slow, warm weight of the evening settle further upon you. You step away from the fountain at last, lingering only long enough to let the soft sound of falling water fade from your foreground and slip back into the gentle background hush of the library's evening. And you follow a low passage that opens off the dining courtyard toward the deeper gardens within. The passage is short and barely lit, its ceiling low enough that you might brush it with a raised hand were you so inclined, and along its walls run small recesses planted with mosses gathered from the cool damp stones beside the harbour. The mosses have been encouraged to grow undisturbed for many years, and they have spread now into soft cushions of green velvet, their tiny pale fronds catching the dim light of a single oil lamp set at the passage's far end. To brush your fingertips lightly across one of these mossy cushions, as some travellers do in passing, is to feel a coolness softer than silk, a touch like the breath of a sleeping cat upon the back of the hand. The passage opens, with a small unannounced grace, into the first of the inner gardens. You pause at its threshold. Tanned for a moment, you simply stand and take it in. The garden is square, perhaps 30 paces along each side, and it is bounded upon all 4 sides by the inner walls of the library, each wall pierced by tall narrow windows of clear glass set within slim cedar frames. Through these windows drifts the very gentlest of glows from the rooms beyond, so that the garden is bathed not in any single light, but in a soft converging luminescence that arrives from many directions at once and casts almost no harsh shadow upon the ground. The night sky overhead is a deep and tender blue, the colour of the inner petal of a morning glory, and a few early stars have begun to show themselves there, small and patient, like the first quiet thoughts of someone settling into sleep. The garden's centre is given to a single old myrtle tree. It has stood here, the elders say, since before the library itself was completed, planted as a sapling by the original founder, upon a morning when the foundations of the great vestibule were still being measured out in chalk lines upon the ground. The myrtle has grown in the long, slow, patient manner of its kind into a tree no taller than 2 grown men but spread wide, its branches drooping outward and downward in soft curtains of small, dark, glossy leaves. Among the leaves cluster the tiny white star-shaped flowers of the late season, no larger than the nail of your smallest finger, each one breathing into the night air a perfume so delicate that you must stand still for a moment before you notice it. A scent like clean linen warmed by sun, mingled with the faintest ghost of lemon peel. Around the myrtle tree in slow concentric rings have been planted the older companions of an Egyptian garden. Closest to the tree itself, in a low circular bed bordered with smooth river stones, grow soft mounds of grey-green sage, their leaves furred and silvery, releasing their warm, savoury fragrance whenever the night breeze moves across them. Beyond the sage, in a wider ring, grow rosemary bushes pruned into low, rounded forms, their needles deep green and fragrant, their tiny pale blue flowers half closed for the evening. Beyond the rosemary, in the outermost ring, grow the pomegranate shrubs, 3 of them set evenly apart, each one bearing at this season the small heavy ornaments of its fruit, the fruits hanging in clusters of 2 or 3, their leathery skins flushed in the sunset colours of pale orange ripening toward deep crimson. The pomegranates have not yet been harvested, for it is the custom of the library to allow them to ripen as long as the fruit itself permits, gathered only when the first of them begins to split open of its own accord, and you can see, low upon one of the shrubs, single fruit that has done just that, its skin opened gently along one curved seam to reveal the gleam of a dozen ruby seeds within, like a small jewel box left half open by an absent-minded queen. The pomegranates of this garden are dedicated by an old quiet tradition to the goddess of memory, and their seeds are eaten ceremonially, 1 each by the senior scholars upon the first evening of every autumn as a small symbolic act of welcoming the year's deeper studies. Narrow path of crushed white seashell winds among the planted rings, leading slowly inward toward the myrtle tree at the garden's heart. The shell crunches softly underfoot, no louder than the sound of a distant page being turned, and the path is bordered on either side by a single low row of dwarf lavender whose silver-blue spikes have begun, in the cool of the evening, to release their old familiar scent into the air. To walk this path slowly is to be wrapped in an unfolding ribbon of fragrances, sage and rosemary at first, then lavender, then pomegranate, then at last the soft white flower perfume of the myrtle itself, each scent rising and giving way to the next in a slow patient procession. You sit for a while upon a low stone bench set just within the outermost ring of pomegranates, its surface warm from the long Mediterranean afternoon and softened with a single cushion of pale wool. From here you can see the whole garden as one composition, the dark central tree, the silver-blue rings of herb and shrub, the night sky deepening overhead, and you can hear, very faintly now, the slow song of the night insects beginning to rise. There are the small green crickets in the herb beds, their voices high and thin, pulsing in slow patient rhythms as if counting some private measure of the night. There is the deeper bass of a single ground beetle in the lavender, its slower call almost like the soft creak of a leather shoe. And there is, somewhere among the upper branches of the myrtle, the gentle small fluting of a tree frog the size of a thumbnail, repeating its 3 soft notes at long intervals, content and unhurried, as if simply marking the slow blooming of the evening. It is at this moment that you become aware of the first of the evening's gentle ceremonies. From a small archway at the eastern corner of the garden, 3 figures emerge in a slow procession. They are the lamplighters, 3 apprentices of the library, dressed alike in soft pale yellow tunics that mark them by old tradition as those who carry the hour of dusk into all the quieter rooms of the great house. Each of them holds a long, slender taper of beeswax already lit, its small flames steady and orange in the still air, and each of them moves with the slow, deliberate grace of someone whose work, though small, is treated as sacred. The lamplighters do not speak. They part company at the centre of the garden, each one taking a different direction, one toward the eastern range of windows, one toward the western, one toward the southern, and as they pass the slim cedar lampstands set along the garden's edges, they reach upward with their tapers and touch the small wicks within the lotus oil bowls one by one. Each wick, as it catches, releases a tiny soft sound, a small breath like the opening of a sleepy eye, and adds a new low golden glow to the gathering brightness around the garden. There are perhaps 20 lamps in this courtyard alone, and the lighting of them takes a full, slow minute, and you find that you do not move at all during that minute, simply watching, breath by quiet breath, as the garden is gently kindled into its evening light. You rise from your stone bench in the inner garden with the slow reluctance of one leaving a particularly kind dream, and you follow the lamplighters as they finish their gentle work in the courtyard and begin their slow, patient procession back into the deeper rooms of the library. The 3 apprentices move now in single file, their tapers held upright before them in the careful manner of children carrying small, precious things across a crowded room, and as they pass beneath each archway they bow their heads very slightly, gesture so quiet and so habitual that they themselves are scarcely aware of it any longer. The bowing of the head before passing through a doorway is, as you will come to learn, one of many small unspoken courtesies that govern the lamp-tending hour, a custom older than the library itself, inherited from the temples of Upper Egypt, where it was understood that any threshold deserves a moment of acknowledgement, no matter how often one has crossed it before. The apprentices walk in a particular order, and that order is not arbitrary. The youngest of the 3, a girl no more than 16 years old, walks at the front. Her hair is dark and her eyes are wide and serious in the manner of a young person who has not yet learned that any work can ever be done lightly, and her hands tremble very faintly as she carries her taper, not from fear, but from the slow, careful concentration of one whose responsibility is still entirely fresh. The middle apprentice, perhaps 20 years of age, walks behind her with the more relaxed grace of one who has tended lamps for several seasons now, and has learnt the subtle balance of the taper, the precise distance at which the flame must be held to kindle a new wick without singeing it. The third and eldest, a young man of perhaps 25, walks at the rear, and his role is less to tend lamps himself than to gently observe the work of the 2 ahead of him, to softly correct the angle of a taper or the timing of a touch, and most importantly, murmur the old whispered words at each lamp as it is lit, a duty that falls always to the most senior of any lamp-tending company. The old whispered words. These are not prayers, though something of prayer lives within them. They are not incantations, though they have the soft cadence of one. They are simply the small phrases that have been spoken at each lamp in the library for as long as anyone can remember, passed down from one generation of apprentices to the next, and the senior lamp tender at each procession is responsible for speaking them so quietly that the lamp itself almost seems to hear them before any nearby ear does. They differ from room to room. The lamps of the vestibule receive a different phrase from the lamps of the reading rooms, which receive a different phrase from the lamps of the copying hall, which receive a different phrase from the lamps of the lower archives, and each phrase is, in its own gentle way, small kindness offered to the work that takes place beneath that particular light. You find yourself drifting just behind the eldest apprentice, your footsteps so soft against the corridor floor that he does not seem to notice you. And as he reaches the first lamp of the reading room corridor and the middle apprentice touches her taper to the wick, you hear him murmur, almost beneath his breath, the words spoken at all reading room lamps for as long as anyone has counted. Be steady, little flame, the words mean in the older Greek, for the eyes that come to you tonight have travelled far, and they wish to read by you, not to wonder at you. The phrasing is awkward in any modern tongue, but in its original it has the gentle weight of a small lullaby, and the lamp, as if it has indeed heard, settles into a steadier, rounder glow than the brief flicker of its first kindling. In the copying hall, when the procession reaches it, the words are different. There the eldest apprentice murmurs, in the same low, patient cadence, words which mean roughly, hold your light, little flame, that no hand may smudge by your shadow what no hand should smudge at all. The scribes do not look up at the procession's passage. They have heard these words 10,000 times, and they no longer require them to be heard in order to be felt. The lamps along the copying hall walls are tended in a particular order, beginning with the lamp nearest the senior scribe's desk and proceeding outward in a slow spiral, an order designed to ensure that the most experienced hands receive their light first, so that any apprentice who has been struggling toward a difficult passage in the dimmer corners of the room will, by the time their lamp is finally tended, find a suddenly easier and brighter page before them, a small unspoken blessing from the lamp tenders to the youngest of the scribes. In the lower archives, when the procession descends, the whispered words shift again, and they grow softer still, for the documents below are older and more delicate, and even sound, the elders have long believed, can disturb the slow patient sleep of very ancient things. Burn low and long, the words mean here, for what you light tonight has waited longer than you can know to be read. The apprentices speak these words at half the volume of the words spoken upstairs, and they tend the lamps of the archives with a special slowness, allowing each new flame to settle entirely before moving on to the next, so that the chamber's amber glow rises by careful increments, never overwhelming the dimmer corners where the eldest tablets rest. There is, you learn, one further custom particular to the lamp-tending hour, and it concerns the lamps that are not lit. In every room of the library, one lamp out of every 12 is left unlit each evening. This lamp, called by the apprentices the sleeping lamp, is chosen by the senior lamp tender according to a slow rotation that takes more than a year to complete, so that no single lamp ever rests 2 nights in succession. The sleeping lamp is meant to remind the readers and scribes of the room that not all knowledge wishes to be illuminated at all times, that some shadows are themselves a part of understanding, and that the dimmer corners of any room hold their own gentle secrets that the brightest of lamps would only obscure. The sleeping lamps in their unlit niches give to each room a single soft pocket of darker quiet, a small mercy of shadow, and you become aware now, looking back along the corridors you have already walked, that you had felt these dark pockets without quite noticing them, the way one feels the rests in a piece of music without separating them out from the notes. When the procession of lamplighters at last completes its slow round and returns to the small archway from which it began, the 3 apprentices set their tapers, still burning, into a low bronze rack beside the archway, where the flames will be allowed to burn themselves down naturally over the next half hour rather than being snuffed by any human hand. A flame, the elders have always said, deserves the courtesy of its own ending, and so the tapers gutter slowly into rest while the apprentices, their task complete, exchange small tired smiles and disperse silently into the deeper rooms of the library to attend to their other evening duties. You drift now, half on instinct and half on the soft pull of curiosity, along a corridor that branches off from the main reading room passage at an angle so gentle that most visitors miss it altogether. The corridor is shorter than those you have walked before, and its walls are lined with woven reed mats stained the warm brown of toasted barley, fitted edge to edge along the lower half of the wall and bordered above by a slim band of carved cedar, painted with a continuous low frieze of small open ears, each one rendered in the patient miniature style of the older Egyptian craftsman, each one slightly different from its neighbours, no 2 ears alike. The frieze runs unbroken along the entire length of the corridor, and you understand, even before you have reached its end, that you are approaching a room dedicated to the act of listening. The corridor opens into the Hall of Listened Words. The room is shaped as a low half-circle, its curved outer wall forming the long sweeping arc, its straight inner wall fitted with 3 small archways through which readers may come and go without disturbing those already gathered within. The floor is laid in soft, dark cork tiles imported, at considerable patience and expense, from the cork forests of the Western Mediterranean, and these tiles hush every footfall to a near-perfect silence, so that the room receives its visitors as gently as a deep meadow receives the first snow of winter. The ceiling is low, perhaps half the height of the great reading rooms, and finished in pale plaster moulded into the very softest acoustical curves designed by a long-ago architect who studied for several years the inner shape of the human ear before drawing his plans for this chamber. The shape of the ceiling, together with the cork floor and the woven hangings along the curved wall, gives the Hall of Listened Words a particular quality of sound, a roundness, a closeness, which every spoken word seems to arrive at the ear, having travelled gently through honey rather than through air. Around the curved wall stand the listening benches. They are simpler than the cushioned benches of the reading rooms, broader and deeper, padded with thick mats of folded wool covered in undyed linen, designed for the slow, comfortable seating of those who will remain in one place for several hours at a stretch. There are perhaps 20 such benches arranged in 2 gentle tiers, so that the rear listeners may see and hear over the heads of those in front, and most of the benches are occupied this evening, though the room remains so quiet that a newcomer might at first mistake it for empty. The listeners sit very still, their hands folded in their laps or resting upon a slim cushioned armrest, and many of them have closed their eyes, surrendering the sense of sight altogether so that the sense of hearing may rise to the fullness of its powers. Among the listeners are several whose closed eyes are not a matter of choice. These are the blind scholars of Alexandria, men and women who have devoted their lives to the deep study of texts that they themselves can no longer see, and who therefore depend upon the slow, patient ceremony of the Hall of Listened Words to maintain their lifelong scholarship. They sit in the front row, by old custom given the gentlest pride of place, and you can see by the soft, attentive tilt of their heads and the quiet readiness of their hands resting upon small wax tablets balanced upon their knees, that they are prepared to take careful notes upon whatever they hear, scratching the shapes of letters into the soft wax with slim bone styluses by touch alone, their fingers long since trained to find their way across a tablet surface without the guidance of light. Among them sits also a smaller number of weary-eyed elders, scholars whose vision has grown dim with age, but who still retain the slow, undimmed appetite of a long lifetime of study. For them, the Hall of Listened Words is a place of continuance, a way of remaining in conversation with the texts of their younger years, even as the small letters of those texts have begun to slip beyond the reach of their gentling sight. They wear small caps of soft, pale wool to keep the night air from chilling their thinning hair, and many of them have brought with them an apprentice or younger family member who sits beside them and refills their small clay cups of warm chamomile tea at slow, respectful intervals as the long readings unfold. At the centre of the chamber, set upon the straight inner wall facing the curved tiers of benches, stands the reader's lectern. It is a simple piece, made of pale ash wood, polished by many decades of careful palms, and it stands at exactly the right height for a reader of average stature to rest their open scroll upon it without strain. Behind the lectern stands the reader of the evening, a woman of perhaps 50 years, her hair drawn back into a long single braid that falls between her shoulders, her tunic the deep slate blue that marks her by an old guild tradition. As a member of the library's small and respected fellowship of professional readers aloud, she has trained, you sense, for many years to do what she is about to do. She has studied not only the text she reads, but the rhythm and texture of her own voice, the precise pace at which a long ode unfolds most beautifully to the ear, the slight pauses that allow a complex thought to settle into the listening mind, the careful breath management that permits a single sentence to flow 40 syllables long without the slightest tremor of fatigue. She lifts her gaze and waits, in the soft, kindly silence of one who never begins her work until every listener in the room has settled fully into stillness. She does not signal for quiet. She does not clear her throat. She simply stands, breathing slowly, her eyes resting upon the lectern, and the room itself seems to round its breathing toward her, every listener finding their own private centre, every small motion subsiding into a deeper hush. When at last she begins, her voice arrives in the air not as a sudden sound, but as a slow, gentle warmth, the way the first heat of dawn arrives in a sleeping room, present already before one has quite noticed its arrival. She is reading this evening from an old Phoenician seafaring chronicle, a text rarely heard aloud in the library because it is preserved only in a single fragile copy that no scholar wishes to handle more often than is strictly necessary. The chronicle tells of a long voyage along the western coasts of the great outer ocean beyond the Pillars of Heracles, of small islands sighted at dawn and lost again by dusk, of a wind that smelled, the long-ago captain wrote, like cinnamon mixed with rain. The reader's voice carries each line with patient grace, and you find yourself listening not only to the words but to the rests between them, the long, slow breaths during which a phrase is permitted to settle in the mind before the next is offered. The blind scribes' bone styluses move quietly across their wax tablets, recording what is said, and the warmth of the chamomile tea drifts from the elders' cups in slow ribbons that seem, somehow, to keep gentle time with the rhythm of the reading itself. You sink onto an empty bench at the rearmost tier. Tanned, you let the words flow over you as they have flowed over so many tired listeners before you, tasking nothing of you, requiring nothing in return. You leave the hall of listened words by the southernmost of its 3 small archways, drawing back a soft hanging of pale grey wool that has been embroidered along its lower hem with a single thin line of silver thread. The universal mark throughout the library, off a passage that leads toward a quieter room rather than a busier one. The corridor beyond is among the narrowest you have walked this evening, scarcely broad enough for 2 persons to pass each other without one stepping aside, and its walls are of plain whitewashed plaster, unadorned by frieze or hanging, kept deliberately simple so that the visitor's mind may begin to empty itself in preparation for the room that lies at the corridor's end. The lamps along this passage are smaller and dimmer than those in the busier halls, mere single-wicked votives set within recessed niches at long intervals, their glow no more than a soft amber breath against the white of the walls. The effect is of walking through a slow, gentle twilight that grows gradually deeper, each step easing you a little further out of the louder reaches of the library and into a chamber whose particular hush requires a particular preparation. At the corridor's end, set into the wall, you find a small wooden door no taller than the height of a slender woman, painted in the soft mossy green of an old olive grove. Above the door, in slim incised letters of pale gold leaf, are written 3 words in the older Greek, words which translate, with some patient effort, as the room of remembered voices. The letters are themselves so soft and so carefully drawn that they do not announce the room so much as invite you to it, and you reach forward almost without thinking, and lift the small bronze latch with the gentle care one would use to lift the lid of a sleeping music box. The door swings inward upon hinges so well oiled that they make no sound at all, and you step into the room. The chamber is small enough that a tall person standing at its centre might, with arms outstretched, almost touch its opposing walls. Its ceiling is low and finished, like the hall of listened words, in soft acoustical curves of pale plaster, though here the curves are deeper still, the plaster moulded into long shallow scallops that draw the slightest sound into themselves and hold it for a moment before releasing it back into the air. The floor is laid in dark cork tiles overlaid with a single great rug of deep red wool, woven by the look of its slow geometric patterns, in the old style of the Cretan highlands, soft beneath the foot, drinking up any whisper of footfall. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with small honeycombed cabinets of dark walnut, each cell holding not the long round scrolls of the reading rooms above, but smaller flat tablets of beeswax laid into thin wooden frames, the older method by which lectures and spoken teachings were once recorded by quick-handed apprentices sitting at the feet of their masters. These tablets are the remembered voices each one preserves, in the small careful indentations of an apprentice's stylus, the words of a teacher long since departed from the world, captured during the quiet evenings of decades past while the teacher still lived and lectured in this very library. Some of the tablets are recent, no more than 10 or 20 years old, the wax still pale and the indentations still crisp. Others are older, the wax slightly darkened by the slow accumulation of lamp soot and the patience of time, the indentations softened into a gentler legibility. The oldest of them, kept in the highest cells along the upper walls, are nearly 200 years old, and the wax in them has darkened to the colour of old amber, the words half preserved and half worn, requiring of any reader a careful patience to make them out. In the centre of the chamber stands a single low desk of pale ashwood, shaped almost as an altar might be, its surface bare except for a single beeswax tablet propped upon a slim wooden stand, an oil lamp of slightly larger proportions than those in the corridor, and a small clay cup of warm water with a single sprig of mint resting in it. prepared, you understand, for the voice of whoever will read this evening. Beside the desk stands a slender, high-backed chair upholstered in the same deep red wool as the rug, and upon this chair sits a single apprentice, a young man of perhaps 20 years, dressed in the soft pale blue tunic that marks him as one of the library's small and respected fellowship of voice-keepers. He has been waiting for you in a sense, though not for you specifically. Each evening, one apprentice from this fellowship is given the gentle duty of coming to this room and reading aloud, for the space of 1 full hour, from one of the remembered tablets. The reading is performed not for any living audience, but for the room itself, and for the voice of the long-departed teacher whose words rest within the tablet, that the voice may continue to speak even when no living ear is necessarily there to hear. It is, you sense, one of the older and more tender customs of the library, descended from a belief that the words of a great teacher do not entirely cease to live so long as they continue to be spoken aloud at regular intervals, and that to allow them to fall completely silent would be a small betrayal of the patient gift of teaching itself. The apprentice does not look up at your entrance, but neither does he ignore you. He simply continues his quiet preparation, lifting the beeswax tablet from its stand with both hands and tilting it slightly toward the lamp so that the indentations of the old stylus catch the light at a particular soft angle. He has been practicing this small motion, you sense, for many evenings, and he has learned the precise tilt that allows the words to become most easily readable to him without straining either his eyes or the tablet's old wax. He clears his throat softly, takes a single small sip of the mint water, and begins. The voice he reads in is his own, and yet, in some indefinable way, not his own. He has trained himself to read the remembered words at the slow, patient pace of the original teacher, with the gentle pauses and unhurried emphases that the long-departed scholar was known for in life. Older listeners, who heard the original teacher in their youth, sometimes step quietly into this room during such readings and sit upon a small bench against the rear wall. Then they have been known to weep softly at how closely the apprentice's voice has come to recall the cadence of the teacher they once loved. The teacher whose voice is being read this evening was a philosopher of natural things, a gentle elderly woman who spent the last 40 years of her life teaching in this very library on the slow rhythms of growing plants. And the apprentice now reads her words on the patient unfolding of a single bean seed in moist earth. The long quiet days of swelling beneath the soil before any green shoot ever emerges into the light. You sit upon the small rear bench, and you listen. Then the room listens with you, and somewhere, very faintly, almost imagined, the long-departed teacher seems to be speaking through the chamber once again. You leave the room of remembered voices as quietly as you entered, drawing the small green door closed behind you with the same gentle care with which you opened it, allowing the apprentice's slow, steady reading to continue undisturbed in the chamber behind you. The corridor of dim votives unfolds again before you, but you do not retrace your earlier path. Instead, where the corridor meets the wider passage of the inner library, you turn rightward, drawn now by a soft drift of cooler air that carries with it, very faintly, the salted breath of the sea. The breath has travelled far to find you, slipping in through some unseen window high above, and it carries within it the small particular fragrance of an Alexandrian harbour at evening, a fragrance compounded of seaweed warming upon the tide line, of damp coiled rope drying on a fisherman's cart, of fresh-caught mullet still glistening in their wicker baskets, and of the slow oily smoke of the great lighthouse far out upon its island. You follow the drift of this scented air along a passage that climbs by gentle imperceptible degrees, until at last it opens upon a narrow stone balcony cantilevered out from the upper reaches of the library. The balcony is small, perhaps 4 paces in its width, and twice that in its length, set into the building's seaward wall at a height of perhaps 3 stories above the ground. And it is enclosed upon 3 sides by a low parapet of pale limestone, topped with a slim cushioned coping of weathered cedar. There is no roof above the balcony, only the open sky, and there is no other person here at this hour. And you understand at once that this small place is one of those secret kindnesses of the library intended for any reader who, in the middle of a long evening study, requires a moment of larger air and longer view. You step to the parapet, and you rest your forearms upon its cedar coping. And you look out. The harbour of Alexandria is spread below you, broader and darker than you had expected, a great curved basin of dark water set within the slow embracing arc of two long stone moles that reach out from the shore like the gentle protective arms of a sleeping mother. The water within the harbour is calm at this hour, broken only by the slow black shapes of moored ships rising and falling in the long patient breath of the swell, their masts inscribing slow arcs against the deepening sky. Lanterns hang from the rigging of many of these ships, small spots of gold and amber drifting upon the dark water, and from somewhere among them rises the soft, distant sound of a sailor singing to himself, a low, slow song in a tongue that you cannot quite identify, perhaps Phoenician, perhaps something older still, the words indistinct but the cadence unmistakable, the cadence of a man at peace with the long evening and with the work of his hands. Beyond the harbour, set upon its small fortified island at the northernmost reach of the long stone moles, rises the Pharos. The lighthouse is taller than anything you have ever seen, taller than any structure in the world this evening except perhaps the great pyramids upriver to the south. And at this distance, viewed across the slow dark water, it appears as a slim pale tower rising in three diminishing tiers toward a single bright crown of fire at its summit. The lower tier is square, broad, and patient, built of great blocks of pale limestone polished smooth by a century of weather. The middle tier is octagonal, narrower and lighter in colour, set off by a slim balustrade upon which you can just make out the small dark figures of two keepers walk their slow accustomed circuit. The upper tier is circular, slimmer still, and at its top, within an open colonnade of slim white columns, burns the great fire that gives the Pharos its purpose and its name. The fire is fed, you have heard, by a slow patient supply of olive oil drawn upward through a long internal shaft by means of a ramp upon which donkeys walk in slow circles all night long, carrying small barrels upward and bringing empty barrels back down. The fire itself is tended by three keepers in slow rotation, each one taking a watch of 4 hours, each one trained from boyhood in the small particular arts of feeding and tending such a great flame. Behind the fire is set a great curved mirror of polished bronze, which gathers the firelight and casts it outward across the sea in a long, slow-turning beam that sweeps the harbour mouth once every full minute, marking for any approaching ship the safe path between the rocks and the slow-shifting sandbars. You watch the beam now as it turns. It begins as a faint brightening upon the eastern horizon, gathers slowly into a long pale shaft of light that travels patiently across the dark water, sweeps past the moles, brushes briefly against the stone walls of the city below the library, illuminates for one long heartbeat the upper sail of a single moored ship, and then continues its slow turning until it is lost again behind the lighthouse's western flank. A full minute passes, the beam returns. The patient ceremony of its turning is older than your own life, older than any life now living, older even than the careful copying of many of the scrolls within the library itself, and it will continue, you understand, with a sudden quiet warmth, long after this evening has been folded into the long folded fabric of the past. It is here, upon this small balcony, with the slow-turning beam of the Pharos sweeping the harbour below you, that the first of the evening's deeper thoughts begins to settle upon you. You think, slowly, about time. You think about how this single evening, this quiet hour, is itself only one small thread within the great unhurried river of time that flows through this city, through this library, through every careful hand that ever pressed a stylus into wax or laid a brush against a fresh page of papyrus. You think of all the evenings that have unfolded within these walls before this one, of every lamplighter who has murmured the old words at the kindling of a wick, of every scribe who has paused to consider the precise shape of a single letter, of every reader who has rested a tired forehead against the cool edge of a basalt table and breathed slowly while the words around them settled into understanding. Each of those evenings was, to the people who lived it, the only evening that mattered. Each of them felt, in its hour, as full and as private and as quietly important as this one feels to you now. And yet each of them has passed gently into the long river. Each of them has joined the great slow company of evenings remembered no longer in particular, but only collectively, as a kind of patient warmth held within these walls, a warmth that you yourself can feel rising softly from the limestone beneath your forearms, from the cedar coping under your hands, from the salt-scented air around your face. The walls of this library remember every evening they have ever held, even when no living mind any longer remembers any of those evenings in particular. The library is in this sense a great quiet vessel of accumulated kindness, a building that has been slowly sweetened over many decades by the patient gentle work of all who have passed through it. The salt air drifts about you on the small balcony, soft and unhurried, and you remain at the cedar coping for a long quiet while, watching the slow circling beam of the pharos as it returns again and again and again, marking the slow patience of the evening with the kind of regularity that asks nothing and consoles deeply. The night has settled more fully now upon the harbour. The early stars have multiplied into a wider scattering across the deep blue overhead, and a thin pale moon has begun to lift itself above the eastern horizon, no more than a crescent, its lower curve faintly silvered against the darker air, its upper curve still shadowed in the soft blue of the not yet arrived deeper night. The sailor's distant song has stilled, and in its place there has arisen the gentle slap of small waves against the stone moles, a sound so steady and so kind that it seems almost to keep its own slow time with the breathing of the watcher who happens to listen. It is here, this gentle hour, that the second of the evening's deeper thoughts begins to settle upon you, and that thought is the thought of legacy. You think first in the slow drifting manner of a mind already half at rest, of all the scholars who have walked these halls before you and who have laboured over their long lives to leave something behind. You think of the great names whose works are now copied and recopied throughout this library, names spoken often in the reading rooms below, names that have travelled across the centuries on the patient backs of papyrus scrolls, the geometers and the astronomers, the poets and the physicians, the historians and the natural philosophers, the cartographers who first dared to draw the unknown coasts, and the medical writers who first dared to describe the slow chambers of the human heart. Each of them, you understand, must have stood upon some small balcony of their own at some quiet hour of their own evening, and must have wondered, as you're wondering now, what it is that any of us truly leaves behind. The simpler answer, of course, is the work itself. A scroll completed, a theorem proved, a poem set down upon a fresh sheet and copied decades later into a careful new hand by the patient brushes of the copying hall. The library keeps such things faithfully, cell by cell, along its honeycombed shelves, and there is great consolation in the thought that one's labour might continue to live within these walls long after one's hand has set down the brush for the last time. Such is the legacy of the named, the legacy of the celebrated, the legacy of those whose works are catalogued and indexed and lent out to other readers under the small brass tags of their fame. But the longer you stand upon this small balcony, the more you find yourself drawn to a quieter and gentler thought that whispers beneath the louder thought of named legacy, thought that seems, fact, be the truer thought of the two. You think of all the unnamed hands that have held this library together. You think of the apprentice lamp tenders whose names have not been preserved in any catalogue, but who have, evening after patient evening, kindled the lamps by which the named scholars have read. You think of the makers of papyrus, the cutters of reeds, and the polishers of sheets, who have, through the slow industry of their long lives, prepared the silent surfaces upon which the famous words have been written. You think of the cooks in the kitchens who have nourished the scholars with figs and barley and warm bread, allowing the scholars' minds to remain unburdened by hunger so that those minds might wander freely toward their highest reaches of thought. You think of the silent woman in the indigo robe who walks her slow circles in the lower archives, dusting nothing, disturbing nothing, simply being present, simply lending her quiet presence to the safekeeping of the older tablets. None of these hands will be remembered by name. None of these voices will be preserved in the room of remembered voices. None of these slow, patient labors will be celebrated in any future scroll, and yet you understand now there would be no library at all without them. The named scholars have leaned all their lives upon a great invisible scaffolding of unnamed kindness, and the deepest legacy of this place is not, after all, the works of its famous, but the slow, gentle accumulation of countless quiet givings by countless quiet givers, almost none of whom will ever know how much they mattered. It strikes you then with a soft warmth that seems to spread outward from the center of your chest into the very fingertips that rest upon the cedar coping, that this is perhaps the truest shape of legacy in any human life. The deepest gifts that any of us leave behind are rarely the gifts we ourselves measure. They are the small kindnesses we have shown without keeping count, the patience we have offered to a struggling apprentice, the careful attention we have given to a sentence that no one will ever know we wrote, the small private correctness with which we have done some unwitnessed task, simply because the task deserved to be done well. These are the gifts that travel furthest into the future, far further than any inscribed name, far further than any catalogued scroll, far further than any monument upon any plaza. These are the gifts that gather, slowly, in the very walls of buildings such as this one, and that warm the limestone beneath the forearms of travellers many centuries hence. The thought is so kind that you find yourself smiling very faintly, almost without meaning to. You look down at the dark water of the harbour where the moored ships rock gently in the slow swell, and you think of the long voyages those ships have made and will make again, the cargoes they carry, the small private kindnesses exchanged between sailors and merchants and dock workers and customs clerks, the whole great unwitnessed economy of small good moments that quietly knits the world together beneath the louder economy of recorded history. You think of how the city of Alexandria itself, this great jewel of the Mediterranean, is built not upon the famous decrees of its founders, but upon the slow, patient labour of every fisherman who has rowed out at dawn, every weaver who has worked her loom by lamplight, every gardener who has trained a young vine upon a courtyard wall. And you think, with the gentlest warmth of all, of yourself. You think of the small kindnesses you yourself have offered, perhaps without remembering them, perhaps without ever knowing whether they were received, the small patience shown to a stranger upon a bus, the careful attention given to a friend's worry even when your own day was tired, the quiet correctness of an unwitnessed task at your own work, completed properly because the task deserved it. These are the gifts you have given, the long, slow legacy you yourself are even now leaving behind, and tonight, standing upon a balcony 2,000 years removed from your own life, you are permitted for a quiet moment to see them as they truly are, small, many, lasting. The balcony beneath your forearms has begun to take on the cool of the deeper night, and yet the cool is not unpleasant, only a gentle reminder that the evening is settling into its slower hours, that the harbour and the city and the library itself are all easing, very gradually, into the long patient rhythm of the night to come. You do not wish to leave the balcony just yet. The thoughts that have begun to arrive here have a quality of slow ripening that asks for a little more time, a little more salt-scented air, a little more of the slow-turning beam from the great pharos that continues, faithful as a heartbeat, to sweep its gold across the dark water below. And so you stay, and the third of the evening's deeper thoughts begins to settle softly upon you. Then that thought is the thought of time itself, and of the long, unhurried seasons of human knowing. You think first of how knowledge moves in the great river of generations, not in sudden leaps but in slow ripening seasons. There are the springs of human knowing, those bright, eager seasons in which a great many fresh ideas push up at once like new green shoots in a wakening field, when scholars and apprentices alike feel the stirring of some new and exciting understanding spreading through their disciplines. There are the summers of human knowing, the long full seasons in which the new ideas mature into broad-shaded canopies under which many minds may rest and work, when the methods of a discipline grow steady and confident, and the great works are written that will be read by the centuries to come. There are the autumns of human knowing, in which the harvest of a long season is gathered and preserved, when scribes copy and recopy the texts of the summer's flowering, when commentaries and indices and careful translations are made, when the slow work of preservation takes precedence over the brighter work of original making. And there are the winters of human knowing, the slower, colder seasons in which little new is born, but in which the seeds of all that has gone before are kept patiently dormant within the warm earth of patient libraries, waiting for the next spring to come. Each of these seasons, you understand, is necessary. Each of them is a part of the slow, patient breathing of human understanding, and no single life is meant to live through all of them at once. A scholar born into a winter of knowing is not a lesser scholar than one born into a spring. A scribe whose entire life is spent copying the works of an earlier age is not a lesser scribe than one whose hand inscribes the first new sentences of a fresh discovery. Each role has its own quiet dignity, and the library in its long, unhurried wisdom has always honoured them all equally, the makers and the keepers, the discoverers and the preservers, the inventors of new questions and the patient guardians of older answers. You think now of the season in which you yourself happen to be living, you who are listening to this story tonight from a time so distant that the Great Library itself has long since passed into legend. You think of how easy it is in any season of human knowing to feel that one's own particular season is the only one that matters, that one's own discoveries and worries and questions are uniquely urgent, that the long river of time has somehow narrowed into the small, swift channel of the present moment. And you think of how this is, gently and forgivingly, almost never quite true. The river is always longer than it appears from any particular point along its banks. Behind you flow many quiet centuries of patient knowing whose ripples are still reaching you even now, and ahead of you stretch many further centuries whose first faint stirrings have already begun in the slow hidden work of countless unnamed minds. To stand at the river's edge and to feel oneself a small part of a much longer flow is, you understand, one of the deepest consolations available to any tired soul. The slow-turning beam of the Pharos sweeps the harbour again, and you watch it with the soft understanding that this beam, too, is part of the long river. It was kindled the very first time by the patient hands of a particular keeper on a particular evening, an evening that felt to that keeper as full and as private and as quietly important as this evening feels to you. He could not have known, that long-ago keeper, that the small flame he tended would still be tended evening after evening for many centuries after his own death. He could not have known how many sailors his patient flame would guide safely home, how many ships would find the harbour mouth by the steady gold of his slow-turning beam, how many families would be reunited at the dockside because his small, careful work had not faltered upon the night of their kin's return. He simply tended his flame evening by evening, doing the small work that was given to him to do, and the slow river of time has carried his quiet labour onward into uncountable unseen kindnesses. This, you sense, is the deeper consolation of belonging to a longer story than any single life can hold. The work that you yourself do in your own evenings of your own life may seem small to you in the moment of its doing. The careful sentence written when no one is watching, the patient kindness offered to a child whose fevered night you have helped soothe, the slow, quiet correctness with which you have folded the laundry, prepared the meal, walked the dog at the appointed hour, kept the small private faith of your daily routines. None of these feels, in the moment, like the kind of work that historians will record. None of them seems large enough to matter to the long river of time. And yet each of them, you now understand, is part of that river. Each of them adds its own small quiet warmth to the great accumulation of unwitnessed kindness that knits the world together beneath the louder economy of recorded events. Small breeze rises off the harbour now, cool and gentle, carrying with it a fresh note of seaweed and far-off cinnamon, perhaps from a merchant ship newly arrived from the trade routes of the East. The breeze brushes past your face like the soft hand of a kind elder, and you feel with the small private clarity that sometimes arrives in late hours of quiet thinking, that you yourself are loved by the long river of time, simply for being a part of it, simply for having added, be your own small quiet living, to its slow unhurried flow. You think of all the souls who have stood, over the long generations upon this very balcony, and you understand that you are not alone here even now. The patient warmth of all those earlier travellers rises softly from the cedar coping under your hands, and the quiet kindnesses of all those earlier evenings linger in the limestone of the parapet, and the slow-turning beam of the pharos returns again and again and again, blessing each of them and you alike. You are part of a longer story than your own life, and the story is gentle and the story is patient, and the story will continue to be told long after you yourself have laid down your own brush for the last time. And you find deep peace in this understanding. Peace that asks nothing of you. Peace that simply rests upon you, soft as a folded shawl, thus the night deepens around the harbour below. You remain upon the small balcony for a while longer, breathing in slow, gentle measures that match, almost without your noticing, the slow returning beam of the pharos as it sweeps its patient gold across the dark water below. The air has settled into that particular hush which arrives upon Mediterranean harbours in the deeper hours of evening, when the wind has stilled itself almost entirely, and the small waves below the moles content themselves with the softest of slappings against the worn stone. Somewhere behind you, far back in the depths of the library, you can just make out the muffled, gentle sound of a scroll being rolled closed by a careful hand, the brief, soft rustle of a finished evening of study being set aside for the night. The sound is small, and it does not interrupt the hush, only adds itself to it the way a single new flake of snow adds itself to the soft whiteness of an already snowed field. It is here, as the night deepens and the city below settles into its own slow rest, that the gentlest of the evening's reflections begins to settle upon you, and that thought is the simple beauty of the past itself, and the kindness of returning, in the warm chambers of one's own imagination, evenings one never lived but that nevertheless seemed to welcome one as if a small place at their tables had always been quietly reserved. You think first of how strange and how lovely it is that the human heart can find such consolation in a time it never knew. You yourself were not born for centuries, perhaps for millennia, after the last lamp of this library was finally tended for the final time. You did not walk these basalt floors in any waking hour of your own life. You did not breathe, with your own breath, the actual scented air of these actual cedar-panelled corridors. And yet here, in the slow, patient dreaming of this single evening, you have found a kind of belonging. The library has welcomed you, the lamplighters have not turned you away, the scribes have not lifted their heads in alarm at your soundless approach, the blind scholars in the hall of listened words have not paused in their listening to wonder at your unfamiliar presence. You have moved through these rooms as a soft and welcome guest, and the rooms themselves have made no objection to your presence. And there is in this gentle reception a kindness that asks of you no explanation. You think, slowly, of all the other evenings to which the human heart is permitted to return in this quiet way, the lamp-lit cottages of forgotten villages whose names appear upon no surviving map, the slow afternoon kitchens of grandmothers who lived and laughed and stirred their soups in centuries that have left no monument, the quiet workshops of unremembered carpenters and weavers and bakers, in whose warm, familiar spaces the slow, patient labour of human craft was once carried forward, with no audience but the maker themselves, and the small dust motes turning in the late shafts of sunlight. None of those evenings is recoverable in any literal sense. None of them can be visited in waking hours. None of them has left behind any photograph, any detailed record, any precise account of what the air there smelled like, or what the floor beneath the foot felt like, or what the slow hands at their work were thinking as they worked. And yet the human heart can return to them. The human heart can imagine its way into any evening it chooses, can find its own quiet bench against the wall of any vanished room, can sit beside any vanished hearth and warm its imagined hands at any vanished fire. This is one of the oldest and gentlest gifts of the human imagination, this capacity to belong, in the warm chambers of one's own dreaming, to times that one's actual life never reached. And tonight, in your slow, patient drift through the Great Library of Alexandria, you have been exercising precisely this gentle capacity, and you have been receiving in return precisely this gentle belonging. It strikes you with a soft warmth that spreads outward from the small space behind your sternum and into the very tips of your fingers, that the past is not merely a thing that has happened, the past is also a thing that welcomes. The past is a great open hand, palm upward, into which any tired imagination may at any time lay its weary head and find rest there. The past does not require of you that you have lived in it. It does not test the authenticity of your memory of it. It does not ask whether you have read all the right books or studied all the right histories. It simply opens itself to your gentle attention, and it offers you a place at its quiet table, and it asks of you only that you sit down softly and breathe slowly and be at peace. You think now, with this same soft warmth, of how many evenings of your own future life will be made gentler simply by the fact that this single imagined evening has been offered to you. You will close your eyes perhaps in some weary hour of some difficult day, and you will recall the slow-turning beam of the pharos, the soft amber glow of the lotus lamps, the patient brushwork of the older scribe with the single grey braid as she copies a single careful word onto a fresh sheet of papyrus. And in that recollection you will find a small private rest, a small quiet kindness offered to your weariness by an evening you never actually lived, but that nevertheless feels somehow like a place you have been before, a place to which you may always return. This, you understand now, is one of the deeper purposes of any patient act of imagination. Such evenings as this one do not merely entertain, they do not merely instruct, they build within the warm hidden chambers of the human heart a kind of slow, gentle architecture of recoverable peace. The lamp-lit corridors of this library, the cushioned benches of the Hall of Listened Words, the small private balcony above the harbour with its slow-turning gold, these will all be available to you in some quiet form for the rest of your life. You will carry them with you. They will not require you to remember every detail. They will simply be there, soft and welcoming, whenever your tiredness reaches for them. And in this sense, the past is not behind you at all. The past is around you. The past is part of the very air you breathe, even now. Every kindness ever shown by any soul anywhere has left, in the great slow river of time, some small lingering warmth. And that warmth has been gathering, century upon century, into the soft cushioned silence in which you now happen to be resting. You are surrounded by it, you are held by it, you are in some quiet sense made of it. The pharos beam returns, sweeps the harbour, vanishes. A single gull cries softly somewhere far out over the dark water. The night has deepened to the point at which even the early stars overhead have multiplied themselves into a wider, gentler scattering, and the moon, no longer merely a slender crescent, has risen far enough above the eastern horizon to lay its own thin silver path across the slow water of the harbour. You smile, very faintly, the gentle understanding that the past has welcomed you tonight, and that you have, your own quiet way, welcomed it back. You draw back from the cedar coping at last, slowly, with the unhurried reluctance of one leaving a particularly gentle hour behind, and you turn your face from the dark harbour and the slow-turning beam of the pharos, and you step softly back through the small archway that leads off the balcony and into the warm interior of the library once more. The corridor that meets you is the same corridor by which you came, and yet, in the deeper hours of the evening, it feels softer, dimmer, more like the inside of a folded shawl than the inside of a building. The lamps along its walls have settled into the lower steady glow that they take on after the first hour of their burning, no longer the bright amber of their first kindling, but a deeper, rounder honey gold, the colour of warm bread crust, the colour of a sleepy candle, the colour of the inside of a closed eyelid held up to the light of an evening hearth. You walk slowly. There is no need to hurry now. The library, you understand, is settling into its own slow evening, and you are settling with it, and the corridor itself seems to walk with you, its dim lamps brightening very softly as you approach each one, and dimming again behind you as you pass, the way a sleepy companion might lean gently toward each soft thing it loves and then ease itself back into rest. You pass once more the small archway that leads to the Hall of Listened Words. The slate-blue reader is still at her work. You can hear her voice drifting very faintly through the curtain. Slower now, gentler still, the long Phoenician seafaring chronicle unfolding in the softest of cadences. The blind scholars in the front row sit very still, their bone styluses occasionally moving across their wax tablets recording. The room seems to glow faintly through the curtain, as though its low-cushioned hush has begun to gather a small private warmth of its own. You do not enter. You simply pause at the archway for a moment, and you breathe, and you let the slow voice of the reader settle once more briefly upon you, and then you move on. You pass the small green door of the room of remembered voices. The young apprentice in the soft blue tunic is still reading, alone, to the empty room, his voice gentle and patient and perfectly paced to recall the long-departed teacher whose words he reads. You can just hear him through the closed door, a low, even murmur about the slow swelling of a single bean seed beneath the moist earth, the long quiet days before the green shoot ever rises into the light. The room hears him, the walnut cabinets hear him, the remembered voice hears him. You listen for one long breath, and then you move on. The corridor turns gently to the right, and you find yourself once more upon the long passage that leads toward the great copying hall. The brushwork has slowed considerably here. Most of the scribes have completed their evening's quota of pages and have begun the small, careful rituals of putting their tools to rest. You watch one young scribe, the same one who copied the children's primer, as she lifts her brush from her work for the final time and lays it gently in a small basin of warm water perfumed with crushed myrtle leaves. The water will slowly draw the ink from the bristles, and by morning the brush will be ready again for another day's careful labour. She places her inkwell's small cedar lid back upon its delicate bronze hinge, folds her linen cloth into a neat square, and rests her hands flat upon the desk for one long contented moment before rising. Her work is done, the day is done, and the small unhurried completeness of her gesture is a kind of blessing, you think, upon the whole quiet evening. You drift on past the workshops where the papyrus is prepared, where the cutting room has fallen entirely still, where the pressing room is dark, where the polishing room shows only the soft glow of a single low lamp left to keep company with the finished sheets that are still drying. The young apprentice who was humming the fisherman's tune earlier has long since finished his work, and the polishing benches are tidy now, the small discs of seashell and cowrie laid in neat rows upon a folded cloth, ready for the next day's hands. You pass through the dining alcoves where the supper is mostly finished. The 4 senior scholars in the alcove of Lesbos are still talking, but more softly now, more sleepily, their dish of honeyed figs entirely consumed, their small cups of rose-watered wine drained, their conversation drifting toward the kind of small, pleasant trivialities that mark the end of any unhurried evening among friends. The 3 younger scribes in the alcove of Rhodes have already departed, their dishes cleared away, the cushions of their benches carefully smoothed by some quiet attendant. The fountain in the central courtyard plays on, slower now, gentler, almost as though it too were drowsy. You pass the inner garden, and you pause for a moment at its edge. The evening lamps lit by the 3 lamplighters earlier this evening still glow, faithful and unwavering, upon their slender bronze stands. The myrtle tree at the garden's centre has folded its small white flowers very slightly inward, the way some flowers do as the night deepens, and the night insects have settled into a slower, sparser song than they sang earlier. The single ground beetle in the lavender has gone silent. The tree frog in the upper branches of the myrtle gives only one of its 3 soft notes now, at long unhurried intervals, content with the smaller offering. The air smells of myrtle and of cooled stone and of the gentle settled sweetness of an evening that has been well lived. The lower archives, when you pass their stairhead, are entirely silent. The guardian in the indigo robe still walks her slow circles down below, you sense, but her footsteps are too soft to reach you. The cool green-amber glow that rises from the cistern's still surface has dimmed only very slightly. The lamps on their papyrus reed stands burning patiently on, doubled into a softer twin glow upon the still water below. The older tablets sleep on in their linen cradles. The cuneiform letters dream, the ancient leather sheets are at rest. The hall of maps and celestial charts, when you pass it, has been left unattended. The cartographer who was working at the central round table has long since departed. The half-unrolled scroll has been carefully rolled closed and replaced within its bronze tube. The 4 small velvet and rose quartz weights have been returned to their proper resting cushion. The brushes have been rinsed and laid horizontally upon their bone rests. The small jar of black ink has been sealed with its tiny cedar stopper. Only the silver constellations of the high vault still burn softly overhead, faithful as the real stars beyond the alabaster oculi, faithful as the pharos beyond the moles, faithful as every patient and unhurried thing in this slow, gentle world. You walk on, soft of foot, soft of breath, through the dimming halls. The library is folding itself slowly, kindly around you. The corridors grow quieter, the lamps grow lower. The soft hush gathers itself into a deeper and rounder silence, and your own breathing has begun, almost without your noticing, to slow into the long, patient rhythm of approaching sleep. You come at last to the long, curved corridor that leads back toward the vestibule, and the corridor receives you with the same gentle hush with which it first welcomed you many slow hours ago. The cedar panelling along its walls has settled into the deeper amber of late evening. The alcoves, with their basin of myrtle water, and their folded linen, and their single sprig of lavender, are still, as they were, faithful as old friends who have waited up for your return. And the lamps along the corridor have lowered themselves by some small, slow degree, no longer kindling the air to brightness, but only keeping it warm, only keeping it soft, only keeping it kind. You walk slowly, 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 and the corridor walks with you, and the long folded ribbon of fragrances unfolds once more in slow reverse. The sleepy whisper of cedar resin, the dry sweetness of papyrus, the faint herbal whisper of bay leaves, the distant ghost of frankincense from the brass bowl in the vestibule ahead. The vestibule, when you reach it, has dimmed since you first entered. The dome overhead is darker now, the lapis blue of its painted ceiling deeper, the small gold leaf stars more pronounced against their ground, glowing softly in the lamplight, as though the painted constellations had begun to sing their own soft little songs of light. The alabaster sculptures of the old benefactors still stand in their shallow niches, their kindly half-smiles unchanged, and you find that you smile back at them now, very faintly, almost without meaning to, the way one smiles at the patient familiar faces of those who have kept us company through a particularly gentle hour. The custodian in the cream-coloured tunic stands once more beside the great bronze doors. He inclines his head as he did before. He does not speak. He simply lifts his hand to the polished bronze and gives a single unhurried push, and the great doors open outward upon their oiled hinges with the same low, rounded sigh, that slow chord of metal and wood and polished stone, the same sound that welcomed you in many slow hours ago, returning you now into the soft outer night. You step through the doorway. You step out onto the worn marble steps. You stop. The night has deepened into its kindest hour. The moon has risen higher, no longer a slim crescent but a slow, patient half-light, laying its silver path across the slow water of the harbour far below. The pharos beam still turns, steady as a heart, sweeping its slow gold across the quiet ships at their moorings. The cobblestones of the avenue before you gleam softly, damp now with the gentle dew of a Mediterranean evening, and the Egyptian wind that brushed past your cheek so many slow hours ago returns to greet you, gentler still, smelling of cedar smoke and sea salt and the dry sweetness of old papyrus that you have carried somehow in your hair and in the folds of your imagined cloak. You stand upon the steps. You do not move. The night does not ask you to move. The night is in no hurry at all. And neither are you. And now, this final gentle hour, allow your imagination to drift, and to drift, and to drift, and to allow the slow, soft images of the evening to return upon you in the patient repeating manner of a tide. Imagine again the slow turning beam of the pharos, sweeping its gold across the dark water, returning, sweeping, returning, sweeping, returning. The patient ceremony of its turning has been faithful for so long, will be faithful for so long, asks of you nothing but only continues gently, gently, gently. Imagine again the soft amber glow of the lotus lamps in the vestibule, hanging from their slender bronze chains, breathing rather than flickering. Each small flame round and steady, Teach small flame the gentlest possible companion to the slow, quiet thoughts of any traveller who walks beneath them. Imagine again the slow, careful brushwork of the older scribe with the single grey braid, lifting her finest brush from its bone rest, taking the smallest sip of darkness from her ink well, pressing the bristles to the small ceramic plate, lowering the brush at last to the fresh sheet, painting one slow stroke and another and another and another, until a single word has been formed and rests upon the page like a small gentle gift offered by the slow patient hands of human kindness. Imagine again the cool green amber light of the lower archive, the still mirror of the cistern doubling every lamp into its softer twin, the silvered guardian in her indigo robe walking her slow patient circles, the older tablets sleeping in their linen cradles, the cuneiform letters dreaming their quiet dreams of clay. Imagine again the small inner garden, the old myrtle tree at its centre, the soft white star-shaped flowers releasing their faint perfume into the night air, the night insects singing their slow patient songs, 3 lamplighters in their pale yellow tunics moving in their slow procession, with their tapers held upright before them like small kind blessings carried into every dimming room. Imagine again the slow voice of the reader in the slate blue tunic, her words arriving in the air not as sudden sounds but as gentle warmths, the long Phoenician chronicle unfolding patiently to the listening room, the blind scholars recording with their bone styluses, the warm chamomile tea drifting from the elders' cups in slow ribbons that keep their own gentle time. Imagine again the small balcony above the harbour, the cedar coping beneath your forearms, the cool salt air upon your face, the slow-turning beam of the pharos sweeping the dark water again and again and again, the consoling thought that you are part of a longer story than your own life, that you are loved by the long river of time simply for being a part of it. Allow these images to drift in slow patient rotation through the warm soft chambers of your imagination. Lamp, scroll, footfall, harbour, lamp, scroll, footfall, harbour. The lamps of the corridor breathe, the brushes of the scribes whisper, the footsteps of the apprentices hush against the cool basalt. The slow waves below the moles slap gently against the worn stone lamp, scroll, footfall, harbour. Allow your breathing to slow further still. The library is at peace, the harbour is at peace, the night is at peace, the slow-turning beam of the pharos is at peace. The patient walls of the library are at peace, full of the long, warm accumulation of every kind unwitnessed thing ever done within them. The whole gentle world of this single evening is at peace, and you are at peace within it. You feel yourself growing softer now, heavier in the kindest way. The marble steps beneath you are soft. The Egyptian wind is soft. The deepening night is soft. The very weight of your own body, gentling now into whatever blanket or pillow holds you in your own time. Soft. The library closes behind you gently, the bronze doors give their final low chord and they settle into their evening rest. The custodian withdraws into the warm dimness of the vestibule. The lamps along the corridor lower themselves by another small, slow degree. The reader in the hall of listened words lowers her voice to a final patient phrase. The scribes lay their final brushes into their basins of warm myrtle water. The apprentices snuff their last working tapers. The slow-turning beam of the pharos turns, and turns, and turns. And you, dear traveller, tarry carried gently downward. The long, unhurried river of this evening folds itself softly around you, into the deep, warm, welcoming arms of sleep. Sleep softly. Sleep deeply. Sleep well.